Settle in, close your eyes, and let me guide you through the darker corners of the American frontier. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a world of breathtaking beauty, but beneath its stunning vistas and compelling characters lies a tapestry of horror, mystery, and tragedy. Tonight we'll explore the disturbing secrets, the unsolved mysteries, and the dark truths that lurk in the shadows of this masterpiece. Let the gentle rhythm of these stories carry you into sleep as we journey through the haunted wilderness of 1899. The world of Red Dead Redemption 2 is not just a playground for outlaws and adventurers. It's a place where darkness seeps through the cracks of civilization, where the wilderness holds secrets that were never meant to be discovered, and where the line between the natural and supernatural blurs into unsettling ambiguity. This is a world where violence is commonplace, where death comes suddenly and often, and where the past refuses to stay buried. Let's begin our journey in the most obvious place, with the event that sets the entire story in motion, the catastrophe that haunts every member of the Van der Linde gang and drives them deeper into desperation with each passing day. The Blackwater Massacre is the ghost that follows the gang throughout the game, the unspoken trauma that colours every decision Dutch makes and every doubt that grows in Arthur's mind. The ferry robbery in Blackwater was supposed to be the gang's greatest triumph. According to the accounts pieced together from conversations throughout the game, the ferry was carrying $150,000 in bank money, an enormous fortune that would have allowed the gang to disappear and live comfortably for years. Dutch van der Linde saw this as the opportunity they'd been waiting for, the one big score that would set them free. But Micah Bell, the snake who would eventually destroy everything the gang had built, encouraged Dutch to pursue it with unusual fervour, pushing him toward a decision that would prove catastrophic. The job went wrong almost immediately. What was supposed to be a quick robbery turned into a bloodbath. The Pinkertons were waiting, or they arrived faster than anyone expected, and suddenly the gang found themselves in a firefight they couldn't win. 22 outlaws died that day, along with 15 Blackwater police officers. The streets ran red with blood as the peaceful town transformed into a war zone. Civilians caught in the crossfire screamed and fled, and the gang that prided itself on having a code, on being better than common criminals, became the architects of a massacre. But the body count doesn't tell the full story of what happened in Blackwater. The most disturbing detail, the one that Arthur and the others whisper about when Dutch isn't listening, is that Dutch himself killed an innocent woman during the chaos. Not in self-defense, not by accident, but in a moment of panic or rage or something darker that none of them want to name. The woman's death haunts the gang, not just because it represents a moral line crossed, but because it reveals something about Dutch that they'd all been trying not to see. The man who preached about civilization's corruption, who claimed to have principles and honour, had murdered an unarmed woman in cold blood. The gang fled Blackwater with nothing. The money they'd killed for remained on the ferry or was seized by the authorities. All they had to show for the massacre was a growing bounty, the loss of several gang members, and the knowledge that they could never go back. The Blackwater money becomes a symbol throughout the game, the phantom fortune that Dutch keeps promising will solve all their problems if they can just get back to it. But Blackwater's locked down tight, crawling with Pinkertons and law enforcement, and the money might as well be on the moon. What makes the Blackwater Massacre truly disturbing is not just the violence, but what it represents. It's the moment when the Van der Linde gang's mythology died, when the romantic notion of honourable outlaws living free collapsed under the weight of reality. Everything that happens afterward, every desperate robbery, every betrayal, every death, flows from that day in Blackwater. The gang is already dead when the game begins. They just don't know it yet. They're ghosts walking through the last days of the Old West, and Blackwater is the moment they died. As we move deeper into the world's darkness, we encounter one of the game's most chilling mysteries, the serial killer who stalks the wilderness, leaving mutilated bodies as calling cards. This is not a mystery that announces itself with fanfare. Instead, it reveals itself slowly, through discoveries that make your skin crawl and your stomach turn. The first body appears strung up beneath a train bridge near Valentine, hanging like a grotesque puppet, limbs positioned in unnatural angles, the corpse a message written in flesh and blood. Arthur discovers a piece of a map on the body, a fragment that means nothing by itself but hints at something larger and more terrible. The body has been dismembered and reassembled, parts removed and other parts positioned with deliberate care. This is not the work of an animal or a crime of passion. This is art, in the most disturbing sense of the word, created by someone who sees murder as a form of expression. The killer has taken time with this victim, has thought about how the body should be displayed, has considered the message they want to send to whoever finds it. The second body is found southwest of the first, in another remote location where the killer knew it would eventually be discovered, but not too quickly. This victim has been treated with the same horrific care, dismembered and arranged in a specific pattern, another piece of the map hidden among the remains. The pattern begins to emerge. The killer is creating a trail, leaving breadcrumbs for someone clever enough to follow. They want to be found, or at least they want their work to be appreciated. This is not someone hiding their crimes in shame. This is someone proud of what they've done, eager to share it with the world. The third body completes the map, and when Arthur pieces the three fragments together, they reveal a location, a small cabin in the woods, isolated and unremarkable from the outside. But inside that cabin is a chamber of horrors that would make even the most hardened outlaw recoil. The walls are covered with newspaper clippings about missing persons, each one a victim whose disappearance was noted but never solved. There are tools of torture arranged with care, instruments designed to cause maximum pain while keeping the victim alive as long as possible. There are jars containing preserved body parts, trophies taken from victims and kept as souvenirs. And there, in the basement, working on his latest victim, is Edmund Lowry Jr., the man behind the murders. He's not a monster in appearance. He's ordinary, almost forgettable, the kind of man you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But his eyes hold something cold and empty, a void where empathy and humanity should be. When Arthur confronts him, Lowry doesn't show fear or remorse. Instead, he seems almost relieved, as if he's been waiting for this moment, for someone to finally see and understand his work. Lowry's crimes extend beyond the three bodies Arthur found. The newspaper clippings suggest dozens of victims over the years, people who vanished without a trace, their fates unknown to their families until this moment. Some of the clippings are old and yellowed, suggesting Lowry has been killing for a long time, perfecting his craft, learning how to select victims who won't be missed or whose disappearances can be explained away. He's been operating in plain sight, a predator hiding among the sheep, and no one suspected until Arthur stumbled onto his trail. The most disturbing aspect of the serial killer mystery is not the violence itself, though that's horrific enough. It's the realization that in this world, in this time and place, someone like Lowry can operate for years without being caught. Law enforcement is scattered and poorly coordinated. Communication between towns is slow. People disappear all the time in the wilderness, victims of accidents or animal attacks or simple misfortune, and no one thinks to look for a pattern. Lowry understood this, exploited it, and built his house of horrors in the gaps where civilization's light doesn't reach. When Arthur brings Lowry to justice, either by killing him or turning him over to the law, there's no sense of triumph or closure. The victims are still dead, their families still don't know what happened to them, and the knowledge that someone like Lowry existed, that he walked among ordinary people and smiled and made small talk while planning his next murder, leaves a stain that won't wash away. The serial killer is a reminder that monsters are real and they look like everyone else. But Edmund Lowry Jr. is not the only killer haunting the wilderness. In the fetid swamps of Bayou Enwa and Blue Water Marsh, where the air hangs thick with humidity and the water reflects the moon like black glass, another group of predators stalks the night. They are called the Night Folk, and they are perhaps the most terrifying enemy Arthur can encounter, not because of their strength or numbers, but because of their alien nature, their complete otherness that defies understanding. The Night Folk are not a gang in the traditional sense. They don't rob for money or kill for territory. They are something older and stranger, a cult or tribe that has rejected civilization entirely and embraced something primal and dark. They paint their bodies with white clay or ash, transforming themselves into ghost-like figures that blend with the fog and shadows of the swamp. They never speak, communicating only through clicks and hisses that sound more insect than human. They use primitive weapons, bows, machetes and poison, eschewing guns in favour of tools that kill silently and up close. The Night Folk set traps throughout the bayou, elaborate snares designed to catch travellers unaware. You might encounter a person standing alone on the road at night, seemingly in distress, calling for help. If you stop to assist them, you'll quickly realise it's a trap. The person is bait, and the Night Folk are waiting in the darkness around you, ready to strike the moment you let your guard down. They attack in complete silence, emerging from the water or dropping from trees, their white-painted faces appearing like skulls in the moonlight. Their victims are found hanging from trees, strung up like the serial killer's victims, but with a different purpose. The Night Folk don't kill for art or psychology. They kill for ritual, for reasons that make sense only within their twisted worldview. Bodies are found with strange symbols carved into the flesh, markings that might be religious or magical, or simply the signature of a group that has descended so far into madness that meaning itself has become fluid. Some victims are found with their organs removed, taken for purposes unknown. Others are simply butchered, killed with such savage efficiency that it's clear the Night Folk have been doing this for a very long time. What makes the Night Folk particularly disturbing is their connection to the supernatural elements of the bayou. This is a place where reality feels thin, where the boundary between the natural and unnatural seems permeable. The Night Folk might be human, might be something that was once human but has transformed into something else through their dark practices. They exist in a space between explanation and mystery, and the game never fully reveals their origins or purposes. Are they practitioners of voodoo or dark magic? Are they simply insane, driven mad by isolation and inbreeding? Or are they something else entirely? Something that predates the European settlement of Louisiana and has simply adapted to survive in the modern world? An old man in the bayou will warn Arthur about the night folk if you encounter him at his campfire. He speaks of them with genuine terror, describing how they've hunted him through the swamps, how he's seen their handiwork and barely escaped with his life. He'll offer to guide Arthur through the bayou safely. But even with his help, the journey is tense and frightening. Every sound in the darkness could be them. Every shadow could hide a painted face and a raised machete. The old man's fear is contagious, and even Arthur, who has faced down entire gangs and killed dozens of men, seems unsettled by the night folk in a way he isn't by normal enemies. The night folk represent something that civilization cannot explain or control. They are the darkness that exists in the wild places, the reminder that humanity's dominion over nature is an illusion. In the bayou, on their territory, the rules change. Guns and bravado mean nothing when you're being hunted by something that knows the swamp better than you know your own home, something that can move through water and vegetation without making a sound, something that sees you as prey rather than as a person. If the night folk are the horror of the bayou, then the Murphree brood are the horror of the mountains. In the Roanoke Ridge region, in the caves and hollows of the Appalachian foothills, lives a family of inbred degenerates who've claimed the entire area as their territory and violently attack anyone who trespasses. The Murphrees are what happens when isolation and poverty and violence compound over generations, creating a group that has lost almost all connection to civilized humanity. The Murphree brood are physically deformed, the result of generations of inbreeding. They have misshapen faces, missing teeth, and bodies twisted by genetic defects. But their physical deformities are nothing compared to their moral ones. The Murphrees are cannibals, killers who don't just murder travellers but consume them, waste nothing, and keep the bones as trophies or tools. Their caves are charnel houses, filled with the remains of countless victims, bones piled in corners, skulls used as decorations, and the overwhelming stench of death and decay. When Arthur ventures into Murphree territory, the atmosphere changes immediately. The forests become darker, more oppressive. You find evidence of their presence everywhere. Bodies hanging from trees, camps littered with human remains, cages where they keep victims alive until they're ready to kill and eat them. The Murphrees themselves are savage fighters, attacking with crude weapons and animalistic ferocity. They scream and howl as they charge, sounds that are barely human, more like the cries of rabid animals. The Murphrees have a hideout in Beaver Hollow, a cave system that becomes the Vander Lynn gang's final camp in the game's last chapter. This symbolism is not subtle. By the end, the gang has fallen so far that they're literally living in a place where cannibals stored their victims. The cave still contains evidence of the Murphrees' activities when the gang moves in, bones and blood stains that no amount of cleaning can fully remove. It's a physical manifestation of how far Dutch has led them, how completely they've descended from their ideals into something monstrous. One of the most disturbing Murphree encounters involves rescuing a woman they've captured and caged. She's been held prisoner for days, watching as they killed and ate other captives, knowing that her turn was coming. The psychological trauma of that experience is unimaginable, and even after Arthur rescues her, you can see in her eyes that she'll never fully recover from what she witnessed. The Murfrees don't just kill people, they destroy them, break them down into meat and terror, and the survivors carry that horror with them forever. The Murfree brood represents the dark side of the frontier mythology. The idea of living free from civilization's constraints sounds romantic, until you see what happens when people actually do it. When they reject all social norms and moral codes and descend into pure savagery. The Murfrees are what the Van der Linde gang could become if they continue down their current path, if they keep rejecting civilization without replacing it with anything better. They're a warning that Dutch refuses to see, a mirror he won't look into. As we drift deeper into the darkness, we encounter mysteries that cannot be explained by human evil alone. The supernatural elements of Red Dead Redemption 2 are subtle, ambiguous, never confirmed but impossible to dismiss. They exist in the spaces between certainty and doubt, and they're all the more unsettling for their ambiguity. In the Blue Water Marsh, between the hours of 9 at night and 3 in the morning, when the fog rolls in thick and the world becomes a grey void where sight extends only a few feet, you can encounter the ghost of Agnes Dowd. She appears as a pale figure in a white dress, glowing with an eerie green luminescence that seems to emanate from within her. She wails and cries, her voice carrying across the water a sound of such profound grief and despair that it chills the blood of anyone who hears it. Agnes Dowd's story is told through her gravestone, which can be found in a small cemetery near the marsh. She was 19 years old when she died on September 4th, 1883. The gravestone's inscription is cryptic but suggestive. She took her own life and others at that tragic young age. The implication is that Agnes killed herself, and possibly her family or loved ones, though the details are never fully explained. What drove a 19-year-old girl to murder and suicide? What happened in that house that ended with multiple deaths? The ghost appears to be searching for something, wandering the marsh where she used to meet her lover in secret, a man her parents disapproved of. Perhaps she's looking for him, unable to rest because their love was never fulfilled. Perhaps she's trapped by the guilt of what she did, condemned to wander the place where she was once happy, now transformed into a site of eternal mourning. Or perhaps she's simply an echo, a psychic imprint left by trauma so intense that it burned itself into the fabric of reality. What makes Agnes Dowd's ghost particularly disturbing is how the game presents her. She's not a jump scare or a scripted event. She appears randomly only under specific conditions, and many players never see her at all. Those who do encounter her often don't realise what they're seeing at first, just a figure in the fog, easy to dismiss as an NPC or a trick of the light. It's only when you get closer, when you see how she glows and how she doesn't quite move like a living person, that the realization hits. And if you try to approach her, she vanishes, disappearing as if she was never there, leaving you alone in the fog with only the sound of her wailing echoing across the water. The ghost is not the only supernatural presence in the game. There is also the strange man, perhaps the most enigmatic and unsettling mystery in the entire Red Dead Redemption series. The strange man appeared in the first game as a mysterious figure who seemed to know everything about John Marston, who spoke in riddles and tested John's morality, and who was implied to be either death itself, the devil, or some other supernatural entity. In Red Dead Redemption 2, the strange man doesn't appear directly, but his presence is felt through a cabin in the bayou that serves as a shrine to him. The cabin is called Bayall Edge, and it's one of the most unnerving locations in the game. From the outside, it looks like an ordinary abandoned cabin, the kind you might find scattered throughout the wilderness. But inside, the walls are covered with paintings, and in the centre of the room is an unfinished portrait on an easel. The portrait shows a figure in shadow, indistinct and unclear. But if you return to the cabin at different points in the game, the portrait changes, gradually revealing more detail, slowly bringing the figure into focus. The paintings on the walls depict scenes that seem to reflect the player's honour level. If you're playing as a high honour Arthur, the paintings show noble animals like eagles and deer. If you're playing as low honour Arthur, they show scavengers and predators like vultures and coyotes. The cabin seems to be watching you, judging you, keeping track of your moral choices, and reflecting them back at you through art. The most disturbing moment comes when you look into the mirror in the cabin. At first you see Arthur's reflection, normal and expected, but if you look carefully, you might notice another figure in the reflection, standing behind Arthur. It's a man in a black suit and top hat with a well-groomed moustache and an expression that's impossible to read. He's not there when you turn around. He exists only in the reflection, watching Arthur from some other plane of existence, present but not present, observing but not interfering. This is the strange man, or at least a representation of him. His appearance in the mirror suggests that he's been watching Arthur throughout the game, that he's aware of everything Arthur has done, every choice he's made, every life he's taken or spared. The strange man is often interpreted as death, or as a divine judge, an entity that exists outside normal reality and serves as an accountant for souls, tallying up sins and virtues and determining what comes next. The final visit to the cabin after Arthur's death shows the portrait fully completed. The figure is now clearly visible. It's the strange man, rendered in perfect detail, staring out from the canvas with eyes that seem to follow you. The implication is that the strange man has been painting himself into existence, or that the portrait has been documenting his growing interest in Arthur's story, or perhaps that Arthur's journey has somehow given the strange man form and substance. The meaning is deliberately ambiguous, open to interpretation, but the feeling it creates is unmistakable. You've been watched by something beyond human understanding, and that something has been waiting for you all along. The strange man is also connected to the town of Armadillo in New Austin, which in Red Dead Redemption 2's epilogue is suffering from a cholera outbreak that has killed most of the population. The town is a ghost of its former self, with bodies piled in the streets, and the few survivors too sick or traumatized to function. A beggar in Armadillo speaks of seeing a man in a black coat and top hat on the outskirts of town, watching but never entering, present but not present. The implication is that the strange man has cursed Armadillo, or that his presence brings death and disease, or that he's simply there to observe the suffering he's caused or allowed. The supernatural elements of Red Dead Redemption 2 are never explained or confirmed. The game maintains plausible deniability. Agnes Dowd could be a hallucination caused by swamp gas or exhaustion. The strange man's cabin could be the work of an eccentric artist. The beggar's story could be the delusions of a sick man. But the game also presents these elements with enough detail and consistency that dismissing them feels wrong. Something is happening in this world that cannot be explained by natural laws, something that suggests the universe is stranger and darker than the characters realize. Let us turn now to the abandoned places, the ghost towns and cursed locations that dot the map like scars on the landscape. These are places where tragedy struck and left a permanent mark, where the past refuses to stay buried and the present is haunted by what came before. Pleasance is perhaps the most disturbing of these locations. It's a small abandoned town in Lemoyne, consisting of the few buildings and a church, all empty and decaying. The town was founded in August of 1883 and was abandoned just 1 month later following a massacre that killed 10 residents. The details of what happened are never fully explained, but the evidence scattered throughout the town paints a horrific picture. The church is covered in graffiti, messages painted in what might be blood or might be red paint, though the game never clarifies which. The messages speak of plague and sin, of judgment and damnation. Unclean is written repeatedly, along with the damned and other religious condemnations. The graves in the cemetery are marked with simple wooden crosses, 10 of them, representing the victims of whatever happened here. One grave belongs to a woman named Agnes Dowd. Yes, the same Agnes Dowd whose ghost haunts Bluewater Marsh. Her death occurred just 2 weeks before the Pleasance massacre, connecting these two tragedies in ways that are never explained. The prevailing theory is that Pleasance was struck by a plague, possibly cholera or another infectious disease, and that the survivors, driven mad by fear and religious fervour, turned on each other. Perhaps they believed the disease was divine punishment for sin, and they killed those they deemed responsible. Perhaps they tried to contain the outbreak by killing the infected, and the situation spiralled out of control. Or perhaps something else happened, something darker and more deliberate. A massacre motivated by reasons that died with the perpetrators. What makes Pleasance particularly unsettling is the sense of abandonment and decay. The buildings are still standing but rotting, nature slowly reclaiming what humanity built. Personal belongings are scattered throughout the town, clothes, furniture, tools, all left behind when the survivors fled. It's as if time stopped in Pleasance, as if the town exists in a bubble where the past is always present, where the massacre is always happening just out of sight. The game never provides closure for Pleasance. There's no mission that explains what happened, no journal entry that solves the mystery. It simply exists, a monument to tragedy, a reminder that in this world terrible things happen and are never explained or resolved. People die, towns are abandoned, and the world moves on without ever understanding why. Another cursed location is Butcher Creek, a small settlement in Roanoke Ridge that's suffering from what the residents believe is a supernatural curse. The people of Butcher Creek are sick and dying, plagued by mysterious ailments that no doctor can cure. They've turned to a supposed shaman named Obadiah Hinton, who claims he can lift the curse through rituals and offerings. But Hinton is a fraud, a con man exploiting their desperation for his own gain. Arthur can investigate the curse and discovers that the real cause of Butcher Creek's problems is mundane but no less tragic. The water supply has been contaminated by runoff from a nearby mine. The residents are being slowly poisoned by the very water they drink, and their symptoms are the result of heavy metal poisoning, not supernatural forces. But even after Arthur exposes Hinton as a fraud and identifies the real cause of their illness, the people of Butcher Creek continue to believe in the curse. They've invested so much in the supernatural explanation that they can't accept the mundane truth. Butcher Creek represents a different kind of horror, the horror of ignorance and exploitation, of people suffering because they lack the knowledge or resources to help themselves, and of predators who take advantage of that suffering. Hinton is not a supernatural threat, but he's monstrous in his own way, profiting from the pain of desperate people, who trusted him to save them. And the tragedy is that even after he's exposed, the damage is done. The people of Butcher Creek will continue to drink poisoned water because they can't afford to move and don't have the means to fix the problem. They're trapped in a slow death, and knowing the cause doesn't change the outcome. In the wilderness northwest of Valentine, there's a small cabin called Clawson's Rest. From the outside, it looks like any other abandoned homestead, the kind you might explore looking for loot or supplies. But inside, you find one of the game's most heartbreaking and disturbing scenes. Two small bodies lie in beds, children who starved to death. Their parents are nowhere to be found, and the implication is that they abandoned their children or died themselves, leaving the children to slowly waste away with no one to care for them. The scene is presented without commentary or explanation. The game doesn't tell you what happened or why. It simply shows you the result. Two children dead in their beds, their bodies preserved by the cold or by the dry air, their faces peaceful as if they're sleeping. There's no mission here, no objective to complete. It's just a moment of horror, a reminder that in this world children die, and sometimes there's no one to save them or even to mourn them. Clawson's Rest is disturbing precisely because it's so understated. There's no monster here, no serial killer or supernatural entity. Just poverty and tragedy, and the casual cruelty of a world where children can starve to death and no one notices or cares. It's a different kind of horror than the Night Folk or the Murfrees, but it's no less effective. It's the horror of reality, of the everyday tragedies that happen in a world without social safety nets or child protective services, where families can simply disappear and no one asks questions. The Van Horn Mansion is another location that defies easy explanation. It's a large, abandoned building in the town of Van Horn, accessible only by climbing through a window on the upper floor. Inside, you find what appears to be an attempt to create a Frankenstein-like creature. There's a table with body parts arranged on it, a bear heart, a boar's head, vulture wings, and a human skull. Someone was trying to assemble these parts into a single being, though whether they succeeded or gave up or were interrupted is never revealed. The mansion raises more questions than it answers. Who was conducting these experiments? What were they trying to achieve? Was this an attempt at reanimation, at creating life from death? Or was it something else? Some ritual or artistic statement that only makes sense to the disturbed mind that conceived it? The game provides no answers, only the evidence of someone's mad ambition and the unsettling knowledge that they were working in secret, in an abandoned building where no one would disturb them. These abandoned places share a common theme. They're all sites of tragedy that have been left to rot. Places where terrible things happened and then everyone moved on, leaving the evidence to decay slowly over time. They're monuments to the impermanence of human endeavour and the indifference of nature. Buildings crumble, bodies decompose, and eventually all evidence of what happened fades away, leaving only questions and the vague sense that something terrible occurred here once. But not all of the game's disturbing content is found in abandoned places or supernatural encounters. Some of the darkest moments come from the main story itself, from the slow disintegration of the Van der Linde gang, and the moral compromises that Arthur and the others make in their desperate attempt to survive. The gang's descent is gradual but inexorable. At the start of the game, they still have some semblance of honour, some code they follow that distinguishes them from common criminals. They rob from the rich, they avoid killing innocents when possible, and they take care of their own. But as the pressure increases, As the Pinkertons close in and the money runs out and Dutch becomes more erratic, those principles erode. They start robbing anyone, killing anyone who gets in their way, and turning on each other. The Guarma chapter is a turning point, a descent into pure violence that strips away any pretense of honour. The gang gets involved in a civil war on a Caribbean island, fighting for a rebel leader who turns out to be just as corrupt and brutal as the government he's fighting against. They massacre soldiers, burn plantations, and commit atrocities in the name of survival. Arthur participates in all of it, and you can see in his face and hear in his voice that something is breaking inside him. This is not what he signed up for. This is not the life Dutch promised. When they return from Guarma, everything has changed. Dutch is paranoid and violent, seeing betrayal everywhere. Micah has his ear, whispering poison and encouraging Dutch's worst impulses. The gang is fracturing, with some members wanting to leave and others doubling down on loyalty to Dutch. Arthur is dying from tuberculosis, coughing blood and growing weaker by the day, and he knows he doesn't have much time left. The question becomes not whether the gang will survive, but how many people will die before it finally collapses. The game forces you to participate in increasingly dark acts. You rob a train and kill dozens of guards. You attack a rival gang and slaughter them to the last man. You help Dutch execute a woman who betrayed them, shooting her in cold blood despite her pleas for mercy. Each act chips away at Arthur's soul, and if you're playing high honour, you can feel the disconnect between what Arthur wants to be and what he's forced to do. He wants redemption, wants to be better, but Dutch keeps pulling him back into violence and darkness. The most disturbing aspect of the gang's fall is how preventable it all was. If Dutch had listened to Hosea, if he'd rejected Micah's influence, if he'd been willing to admit when his plans weren't working, they might have survived. But Dutch's pride and his inability to adapt doom them all. He keeps insisting they need just one more score, just one more job, and then they can disappear. But there's always another score, always another reason to stay and fight, and each job makes their situation worse. Arthur's tuberculosis diagnosis is the game's most powerful moment of horror, not because of gore or violence, but because of what it represents. Arthur contracts the disease from Thomas Downes, a man he beats to death while collecting a debt for Strauss. Downes coughs blood in Arthur's face during the beating, and that moment of contact is enough to transmit the disease. Arthur doesn't know it at the time, doesn't realise that he's just been given a death sentence, but the game makes sure the player sees it, makes sure we understand the significance of that blood. When Arthur is finally diagnosed, the doctor tells him plainly that there's no cure, that he has months at best, and that he should get his affairs in order. The disease will slowly destroy his lungs, making it harder to breathe, causing him to cough up blood, weakening him until he can no longer function, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. In 1900, tuberculosis is a death sentence, especially for someone living rough like Arthur, without access to proper medical care or the ability to rest and recover. The horror of Arthur's tuberculosis is existential. It's not a dramatic death in a gunfight or a heroic sacrifice. It's a slow, undignified decline, a disease that will kill him no matter what he does. All his strength, all his skill with guns, all his toughness and determination, none of it matters against bacteria in his lungs. He's going to die, and he knows it, and he has to figure out what to do with the time he has left. The game's mechanics reflect Arthur's decline. His stamina decreases as the disease progresses. He coughs more frequently, sometimes at inopportune moments during stealth or combat. His face becomes gaunt, his eyes hollow. You can see him dying in real time. Watch as the disease consumes him from the inside. It's a remarkably brave choice by Rockstar to make the player character terminally ill and to show the progression of that illness without flinching or romanticizing it. Arthur's response to his diagnosis depends on the player's choices, but in the high honor path he seeks redemption. He tries to help people, to make amends for the harm he's caused, to ensure that the people he cares about survive even if he doesn't. He helps John Marston and his family escape, giving them the money and the opportunity to start over. He confronts Dutch about his increasingly erratic behaviour, trying to make him see reason, even though he knows it's futile. He writes in his journal about his regrets, about the life he could have lived if he'd made different choices. The low honour path is darker and more nihilistic. Arthur becomes bitter and cruel, lashing out at the world that's killing him. He embraces his identity as an outlaw, taking what he wants and killing anyone who gets in his way. He doesn't seek redemption, because he doesn't believe he deserves it, or that it's possible. He's going to die, and he's going to die as he lived, violently, without apology, without hope for anything better. Both paths lead to the same place, a confrontation with Micah on a mountain, with Arthur too weak to continue, his body failing him at the moment when he needs it most. The high honour ending shows Arthur watching the sunrise, finding a moment of peace before he dies. The low honour ending shows Micah shooting him in the head, ending his life without ceremony or dignity. Either way, Arthur Morgan dies, and the world moves on without him. The epilogue, which follows John Marston as he tries to build a new life, is bittersweet at best and tragic at worst. John gets his ranch, gets his family, gets the peaceful life that Arthur died to give him. But players of the first Red Dead Redemption know how this story ends. They know that in a few years, the government will come for John, will force him to hunt down his former gang members, and will eventually betray and kill him. Everything Arthur sacrificed for, everything he died to protect, will be destroyed. John's family will survive, but John himself will die, gunned down by the same forces that destroyed the Van der Linde gang. This knowledge casts a shadow over the entire epilogue. Every happy moment with John's family is tinged with the awareness that it's temporary, that tragedy is coming and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. The game becomes a meditation on the futility of trying to escape your past, on how violence begets violence in an endless cycle, and on how the sins of the father are visited upon the son. The game also contains numerous smaller disturbing details that players might miss if they're not paying attention. There's a vampire in St. Denis who hunts victims at night, draining their blood and leaving their corpses in alleys. There's a serial killer who targets prostitutes, leaving their bodies in specific locations around the city. There's a cult in the woods that practices human sacrifice, with altars covered in blood and bones. There's a feral man living in the wilderness who has completely abandoned humanity, living like an animal and attacking anyone who approaches. These details create a world that feels dangerous and unpredictable, where horror lurks around every corner and safety is an illusion. You can be riding through beautiful countryside one moment and stumble upon a massacre the next. You can be exploring a peaceful forest and suddenly find yourself surrounded by the night folk. The game keeps you off balance, never letting you get too comfortable, always reminding you that this is a world where terrible things happen, and often there's no explanation or justice. The environmental storytelling is particularly effective at creating this atmosphere of dread. You'll find campsites where everyone has been killed, their bodies arranged in disturbing ways. You'll find cabins where families died together, sometimes from disease, sometimes from violence, sometimes from causes that are never explained. You'll find evidence of crimes and tragedies scattered throughout the world. A burned wagon with charred bodies inside, a hanging tree with multiple nooses, a mass grave filled with unmarked bodies. These discoveries are never accompanied by missions or objectives. They're just there, part of the world, waiting to be found by curious players, and that makes them more effective, because they feel organic rather than scripted. You're not being guided to these horrors, you're stumbling upon them naturally, the way you might in the real world, and that makes them feel more real and more disturbing. The game's treatment of violence is also worth examining. Red Dead Redemption 2 is an extremely violent game, with detailed gore and realistic injury systems. You can shoot people in specific body parts and watch them react appropriately. A leg shot will make them fall and crawl. An arm shot will make them drop their weapon. A gut shot will make them clutch their stomach and slowly bleed out. The game doesn't shy away from showing the consequences of violence, the way bodies crumple and bleed, the way people scream and beg for their lives. But the game also seems to be commenting on violence, questioning it even as it allows you to participate in it. Arthur's journal entries often express regret about the killing, wondering if there was another way, questioning whether the violence was necessary. NPCs will remember if you've been violent in their town, treating you with fear and suspicion. The honor system rewards you for showing mercy and punishes you for unnecessary cruelty. The game is giving you the tools to be as violent as you want, but it's also asking you to think about what that violence means and what it costs. The most disturbing violence in the game is often the most mundane. It's not the dramatic shootouts or the boss fights, it's the small moments of cruelty that happen in the margins. It's beating a man to death to collect a debt, knowing that he's sick and that his family will starve without him. It's robbing a homestead and having to decide whether to kill the witnesses or let them live to report you. It's watching Dutch execute someone in cold blood and realizing that the man you've been following is capable of casual murder when it serves his purposes. These moments are disturbing because they're choices, because the game makes you complicit in them. You can refuse some of them, can choose mercy over violence, but often the game forces your hand, makes you participate in acts you might find morally repugnant. And that discomfort is intentional. The game wants you to feel the weight of these choices, to understand that Arthur is not a hero, that the outlaw life is not romantic or noble, that violence has real consequences even in a video game. The treatment of Native Americans in the game is particularly dark and historically accurate in its depiction of genocide and cultural destruction. You encounter several Native American characters who are watching their way of life being systematically destroyed. Their land is being stolen, their people are being killed or forced onto reservations, and their culture is being suppressed by a government that sees them as obstacles to progress, rather than as human beings with rights. Rain's Fall, a Native American chief, represents the tragedy of peaceful resistance. He tries to negotiate with the government, tries to find a way for his people to survive without resorting to violence. But the government has no interest in negotiation. They want the land, and they're willing to use any means necessary to take it. Rains Falls Sun, Eagle Flies, represents the alternative, violent resistance, fighting back against the injustice even though it's ultimately futile. The game shows both approaches and suggests that neither will work, that the Native Americans are doomed regardless of what they do. The mission where you help the Native Americans attack an oil refinery is particularly powerful and disturbing. You see the environmental destruction caused by the oil company, the way they've polluted the water and destroyed the land. You see the casual racism of the workers who view the Native Americans as subhuman. And you participate in the attack, killing dozens of people in a mission that feels less like justice and more like a futile gesture of defiance. The refinery will be rebuilt, the oil company will continue its operations, and the Native Americans will still lose their land. The violence changes nothing except the body count. The game doesn't offer easy answers or comfortable resolutions to these issues. It presents the historical reality of Native American genocide and lets you sit with the discomfort of that reality. It shows you that this is a world built on violence and theft, where the strong take from the weak and call it progress, and where resistance is crushed regardless of whether it's peaceful or violent. The Blackwater Athletics team mystery is another disturbing element that many players miss. Newspaper articles mention that an entire athletics team from Blackwater has gone missing, and their bodies are eventually found dismembered and arranged to spell out a letter. This is implied to be the work of Edmund Lowry Jr., the serial killer, but the scale of the crime is staggering. An entire team of young athletes killed and mutilated, their bodies used as components in the killer's twisted art. The families of these victims will never get closure, will never understand why their sons died or what their final moments were like. The mystery is based on a real historical event, the Los Manicheros massacre in Colombia, where a football team was kidnapped and killed. Rockstar took this real tragedy and incorporated it into their game, using it to add depth to the serial killer storyline. It's a reminder that the horrors in Red Dead Redemption 2, while exaggerated for dramatic effect, are often rooted in real historical violence and tragedy. The game's depiction of mental illness and trauma is also worth noting. Several characters are clearly suffering from what we would now recognise as PTSD, depression, or other mental health issues. But in the world of 1899, there's no treatment or even understanding of these conditions. They're just expected to cope, to push through, to keep functioning despite the psychological damage they've sustained. Arthur himself shows signs of depression and trauma, especially after his tuberculosis diagnosis. He becomes more introspective, more prone to dark thoughts, more aware of his own mortality. His journal entries become increasingly melancholic, filled with regrets and what-ifs. He's processing trauma in real time, trying to make sense of a life spent in violence, trying to find meaning in the face of his impending death. Other gang members show similar signs. Karen Jones drinks heavily to cope with the stress and trauma of the outlaw life, and her alcoholism gets progressively worse as the gang's situation deteriorates. By the end, she's barely functional, drinking from the moment she wakes up until she passes out at night. The game doesn't judge her for this. It presents it as a realistic response to unbearable circumstances, a way of numbing pain that can't be addressed or healed. Reverend Swanson is addicted to morphine, using it to escape from his own demons and the guilt he feels about his past. He's a man of God who has lost his faith, who sees the evil in the world and can't reconcile it with his beliefs. His addiction is both a symptom of his spiritual crisis and a way of avoiding it, of creating a chemical buffer between himself and the reality he can't face. The game treats these characters with compassion, showing their struggles without sensationalizing them. It acknowledges that the outlaw life takes a psychological toll, that constant violence and stress and fear will break people down, and that in a world without mental health care or support systems, people cope however they can, even if those coping mechanisms are destructive. The game's ending, regardless of which version you get, is profoundly sad and disturbing in its implications. Arthur dies, either peacefully watching the sunrise or violently at Micah's hands, and the gang he spent his life protecting is destroyed. Some members escape and build new lives, but others die or disappear, their fates unknown. Dutch, the man Arthur followed for decades, descends into complete madness, becoming the villain of the first game, a shadow of the charismatic leader he once was. The epilogue shows John trying to build a normal life, but the shadow of violence follows him. He can't escape his past, can't fully leave the outlaw life behind, and eventually it catches up with him. The game ends with John standing on his ranch looking out at the land he's worked so hard to claim, and if you know what's coming, the moment is heartbreaking. This peace is temporary. This happiness is borrowed time. The cycle of violence will continue, and John will die just like Arthur did, just like Dutch will, just like everyone who lived by the gun eventually does. The game's message seems to be that violence is a trap, a cycle that's almost impossible to escape. Once you start down that path, once you make your living through crime and killing, it becomes harder and harder to stop. The skills that keep you alive in that world make you unsuited for any other life. The enemies you make never forget. The law never stops hunting you. And eventually, violence catches up with you, and you die, and the world moves on without you. This is not a message that offers comfort or hope. It's a dark, nihilistic view of the outlaw life, one that strips away the romance and shows the ugly reality underneath. The game lets you play as a gunslinger, lets you experience the thrill of robberies and shootouts, but it also makes you face the consequences of that lifestyle. It shows you the people you hurt, the lives you destroy, the communities you terrorize. It makes you complicit in the violence and then asks you to reflect on what that violence means. The disturbing lore of Red Dead Redemption 2 is not just about serial killers and ghosts and cannibals. Though those elements are certainly present and effective, it's about the darkness that exists in human nature, the capacity for cruelty and violence that civilization tries to suppress, but never fully eliminates. It's about the tragedies that happen in the margins, the people who suffer and die without anyone noticing or caring. It's about the futility of trying to escape your past, and the inevitability of consequences catching up with you. The game creates a world that feels real in its darkness, where bad things happen for no reason, where good people suffer and evil people prosper, where justice is rare and mercy is rarer. It's a world that reflects the harsh realities of the historical period it depicts, but it's also a world that feels relevant to our own time, with its themes of corruption, inequality, violence, and the struggle to find meaning in a seemingly indifferent universe. As you drift towards sleep, think about the stories we've explored tonight. Think about Arthur Morgan, dying of tuberculosis, trying to find redemption in his final days. Think about the victims of Edmund Lowry Jr., their lives cut short by a monster who saw them as nothing more than materials for his art. Think about Agnes Dowd, wandering the marsh for eternity, searching for something she'll never find. Think about the night folk, lurking in the bayou, waiting for their next victim. Think about the Murfree brood, living in their caves, having descended so far from humanity that they've become something else entirely. These stories are dark, yes, but they're also compelling. They draw us in because they touch on fundamental fears and questions. What happens when civilization fails? What lurks in the darkness beyond the campfire's light? What are we capable of when pushed to our limits? How do we find meaning in a world that seems designed to crush us? These are questions that Red Dead Redemption 2 asks but doesn't always answer, leaving us to grapple with them ourselves. The game's world is beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The same landscape that takes your breath away with its stunning vistas can hide horrors in its shadows. The same frontier that promises freedom and opportunity can trap you in cycles of violence and desperation. The same characters who show moments of kindness and humanity can commit acts of shocking cruelty. This duality is what makes the game so powerful and so disturbing. It refuses to be simple, refuses to offer easy moral judgments, refuses to let you look away from the darkness even as it shows you the light. The supernatural elements add another layer to this darkness. They suggest that the world is not just physically dangerous but metaphysically uncertain, that there are forces at work beyond human understanding, that death might not be the end of suffering. Agnes Dowd's ghost implies that some traumas are so profound they echo beyond death, trapping souls in eternal repetition of their worst moments. The strange man suggests that someone or something is watching, judging, keeping score of our sins and virtues for purposes we can't comprehend. These supernatural elements work because they're ambiguous. The game never confirms that they're real, never breaks its realistic tone to show you definitive proof of the paranormal, but it also presents them with enough detail and consistency that dismissing them feels wrong. You're left in a state of uncertainty, not sure what to believe, and that uncertainty is more unsettling than any definitive answer could be. The historical context adds yet another dimension to the horror. This is not a fantasy world where you can dismiss the darkness as pure imagination. This is a depiction, however stylized, of a real time and place. The violence, the racism, the exploitation, the suffering, all of it happened, or things very much like it happened. The Native American genocide was real. The exploitation of workers was real. The casual violence of the frontier was real. The game is holding up a mirror to history and asking us to look at what we see, and what we see is often ugly and disturbing. But the game also shows moments of beauty and humanity that make the darkness more bearable. Arthur's capacity for kindness, even as he's dying. The loyalty and love within the gang, even as it's falling apart. The strangers who help each other despite having no reason to do so. The natural world's indifferent beauty, continuing regardless of human drama. These moments don't erase the darkness, but they provide contrast, showing that even in the worst circumstances there's still room for decency and compassion. The game's ultimate message might be that we're all capable of both great good and great evil, that circumstances and choices determine which path we take, and that redemption is possible even for those who have done terrible things. Arthur Morgan is a murderer and a thief, but he's also capable of selflessness and sacrifice. Dutch van der Linde is a charismatic leader who inspires loyalty, but he's also a narcissist who leads his followers to destruction. Every character contains multitudes, and the game refuses to reduce them to simple heroes or villains. This moral complexity extends to the player's experience. The game gives you choices, but often they're choices between bad options. Do you kill the witness or let them report you? Do you rob the homestead or leave the family alone? Do you help Dutch with his increasingly questionable plans or try to resist? There are no perfect choices, no way to play the game without getting blood on your hands. You're forced to compromise, to make decisions you're not comfortable with, to participate in violence even if you'd prefer not to. This discomfort is intentional and important. The game is not letting you off the hook, not allowing you to maintain the comfortable distance of a player controlling a character. It's making you complicit, making you feel the weight of these choices, making you think about what it means to participate in violence even in a fictional context. It's asking questions about agency and responsibility, about the difference between the player and the character, about what it means to enjoy a game that depicts such darkness. Some players find this uncomfortable and prefer games that offer clearer moral frameworks, where you can be unambiguously heroic and feel good about your actions. But Red Dead Redemption 2 is not interested in making you feel good. It's interested in making you think, in challenging your assumptions, in showing you perspectives and experiences that might be outside your comfort zone. It's a game that respects its audience enough to present difficult material and trust that they can handle it. The game's length and pacing contribute to its emotional impact. This is not a short experience that you can consume in a few hours. It's a massive game that can take 100 hours or more to fully explore, and that length allows the story to breathe, allows relationships to develop, allows the world to feel lived in and real. By the time Arthur dies, you've spent so much time with him that it feels like losing a friend. By the time the gang falls apart, you've invested so much in these characters that their fates genuinely matter to you. This emotional investment makes the dark moments hit harder. When you discover the children's bodies at Clawson's Rest, it's not just a shocking image, it's a tragedy that affects you because you've come to care about this world and the people in it. When Arthur coughs up blood and realizes he's dying, it's not just a plot point, it's a devastating moment because you've spent dozens of hours with this character and don't want to see him suffer. The game earns its emotional moments through time and care, building relationships and investment that make the payoffs meaningful. The game also benefits from exceptional voice acting and motion capture that brings the characters to life in remarkable ways. Roger Clark's performance as Arthur Morgan is nuanced and powerful, conveying the character's complexity through subtle changes in tone and expression. When Arthur is healthy and confident, Clark's voice is strong and assured. As the tuberculosis progresses, the voice becomes weaker, more strained, filled with pain and exhaustion. You can hear Arthur dying in Clark's performance, and it makes the character's decline all the more heartbreaking. The supporting cast is equally strong, with each actor bringing depth and humanity to their characters. Benjamin Byron Davis makes Dutch van der Linde charismatic and terrifying in equal measure, showing how a leader can inspire loyalty while leading his followers to destruction. Rob Weithoff returns as John Marston, bringing the same grounded authenticity he brought to the first game. The entire cast commits fully to their roles, creating performances that feel real and lived in rather than like actors reading lines. The motion capture technology allows for subtle physical performances that enhance the emotional impact. You can see the exhaustion in Arthur's posture as he grows sicker. You can see the madness growing in Dutch's eyes as his plans fall apart. You can see the fear in the faces of NPCs when you threaten them. These small details add up to create characters that feel like real people rather than video game avatars. and that realism makes their suffering more affecting. The game's music also plays a crucial role in creating its atmosphere. The soundtrack, composed by Woody Jackson, is sparse and atmospheric, using silence as effectively as sound. During exploration, the music is minimal, allowing the natural sounds of the environment to dominate. During emotional moments, the music swells with orchestral arrangements that emphasize the drama without overwhelming it. During action sequences, the music becomes intense and driving, creating urgency and excitement. But it's the licensed songs that provide some of the game's most powerful moments. That's the Way It Is by Daniel Lanois plays during a montage late in the game, showing Arthur helping people and trying to make amends for his past. The song's melancholic lyrics about acceptance and letting go perfectly capture Arthur's emotional state as he faces his mortality. Unshaken by D'Angelo plays during another key moment, its lyrics about standing firm in the face of adversity matching Arthur's determination to do right, even as everything falls apart around him. These musical moments are carefully placed to maximize their emotional impact. They come at points in the story where the player is already emotionally invested, where the stakes are high and the outcomes uncertain. The music doesn't tell you how to feel, it enhances what you're already feeling, amplifying the emotions the story has built up over dozens of hours. It's the difference between manipulation and genuine emotional resonance, and the game consistently achieves the latter. The game's visual design also contributes to its disturbing atmosphere. The lighting is often dim and shadowy, with darkness that feels oppressive and threatening. The weather effects create mood, fog that reduces visibility and makes every sound seem closer and more threatening, rain that turns the world grey and miserable, snow that muffles sound and creates an eerie silence. The colour palette shifts based on location and situation, with the bayou rendered in sickly greens and browns, the mountains in cold blues and whites, and the desert in harsh yellows and oranges. The character designs for the various threats are particularly effective. The night folk's white body paint makes them look like corpses or ghosts, especially in the fog and darkness of the bayou. The Murfree brood's physical deformities make them look inhuman, like something that has devolved beyond recognition. Edmund Lowry Jr. looks disturbingly normal, which makes him more frightening than if he were obviously monstrous. The game understands that horror often comes from the familiar made strange, from the normal twisted into something wrong. The environmental design creates spaces that feel genuinely unsettling. The abandoned buildings are filled with signs of the lives that were lived there, personal belongings, furniture, photographs, all left behind when tragedy struck. The caves where the Murfrees live are dark and claustrophobic, filled with the evidence of their cannibalism. The bayou is a maze of water and vegetation, where visibility is limited and threats can come from any direction. These spaces are designed to make you uncomfortable, to keep you on edge, to remind you that you're not safe. The game's commitment to realism extends to its depiction of death and injury. Bodies don't disappear, they remain where they fall, decomposing over time, attracting scavengers. Bloodstains persist, marking the sites of violence. Wounded animals leave blood trails that you can follow. The game is showing you the consequences of violence in visceral, undeniable ways, refusing to sanitize or abstract the killing that's central to the gameplay. This realism serves a purpose beyond mere shock value. It's forcing you to confront what you're doing, to see the results of your actions rather than treating them as abstract numbers or points. When you shoot someone and watch them fall, clutching their wound and crying out in pain, it's harder to dismiss it as just a game mechanic. When you see the body still lying there hours later, being picked at by vultures, it's a reminder that your actions have consequences even in a virtual world. The game also depicts the economic realities of the time period in ways that are often disturbing. You see the grinding poverty that drives people to crime, the exploitation of workers by wealthy industrialists, the way the system is rigged to benefit the few at the expense of the many. You see families living in shacks, barely surviving, one bad harvest or illness away from starvation. You see children working in dangerous conditions, their childhood stolen by economic necessity. You see the casual cruelty of a world where human life is cheap and suffering is commonplace. These economic realities provide context for the gang's criminal activities. They're not just robbing for fun or out of pure greed. They're trying to survive in a world that offers them few legitimate options. Dutch's philosophy about civilization being corrupt isn't entirely wrong, even if his solutions are misguided. The game is showing you a world where the system is genuinely unjust, where the law protects the wealthy and punishes the poor, where honest work often means exploitation and suffering. But the game also shows that crime isn't a solution to these problems. The gang's robberies hurt ordinary people as much as they hurt the wealthy. Their violence creates more suffering, not less, and ultimately their criminal lifestyle leads to their destruction, proving that you can't build a sustainable life on theft and murder. The game is presenting a complex picture where the system is unjust, but rebellion against it through violence only makes things worse. The treatment of women in the game is also worth examining. The world of Red Dead Redemption 2 is deeply sexist, reflecting the historical reality of the time period. Women have limited options and opportunities, facing discrimination and exploitation at every turn. But the game also shows women resisting these constraints, fighting for agency and dignity in a world that tries to deny them both. Sadie Adler's arc is particularly powerful. She starts as a grieving widow, traumatized by the murder of her husband and her own near-death experience. But she refuses to be defined by her trauma or limited by society's expectations. She learns to fight, becomes one of the gang's most capable members, and eventually becomes a bounty hunter, carving out a life for herself on her own terms. Her transformation is inspiring, but the game doesn't pretend it's easy, or that she's fully healed from her trauma. She carries her pain with her, and it shapes who she becomes. The prostitutes in St. Denis and other towns are depicted with sympathy and humanity. They're not just background decoration or quest givers. They're people trying to survive in a world that offers them few options. Some are trapped by debt or circumstance, unable to leave even if they want to. Others have made peace with their profession, finding ways to maintain dignity and agency within a system designed to exploit them. The game doesn't judge them or sensationalize their work. It simply shows them as people doing what they need to do to survive. The game's depiction of masculinity is also complex and often critical. Arthur and the other male characters are trapped by expectations of what it means to be a man in this time and place. They're expected to be tough, to solve problems with violence, to never show weakness or vulnerability. These expectations are toxic, pushing them toward behaviours that harm themselves and others. Arthur's journey involves learning to reject some of these expectations, to allow himself to be vulnerable, to admit when he's wrong, to seek connection and meaning beyond violence and dominance. Dutch represents toxic masculinity taken to its extreme. He can never admit he's wrong, never show weakness, never back down from a challenge. His pride and his need to be seen as strong and in control lead him to make increasingly bad decisions, and his inability to admit his mistakes means he can never course correct. He'd rather lead his followers to destruction than admit he was wrong, and that pride is ultimately what destroys the gang. The game is asking questions about what healthy masculinity might look like, what it means to be strong without being cruel, what it means to be a man without buying into the toxic expectations that harm everyone. Arthur's high honor path suggests some answers. Strength can mean protecting the vulnerable. Being a man can mean admitting your mistakes and trying to do better. Toughness can coexist with compassion and vulnerability. But the game doesn't pretend these lessons are easy, or that Arthur fully learns them. He's struggling with these questions until the very end, trying to figure out who he is and who he wants to be. The game's exploration of loyalty and betrayal is particularly painful. The Van der Linde gang is presented as a family, with bonds that go beyond mere criminal association. These people have lived together, fought together, saved each other's lives countless times. They have history and shared experiences that create genuine love and loyalty. But as the pressure increases and the situation becomes more desperate, those bonds begin to fray. Micah Bell is the catalyst for much of the betrayal, whispering poison in Dutch's ear and turning him against longtime loyal members. But Micah couldn't succeed if there weren't already cracks in the foundation, if Dutch weren't already susceptible to paranoia and manipulation. The betrayals that follow are all the more painful because they come from people who genuinely cared about each other, who are being forced by circumstances and poor leadership to turn on each other. The moment when Arthur realizes that Dutch has been lying to him, that the man he's followed for decades has been putting his own interests above the gang's, is devastating. It's not a sudden revelation, but a gradual dawning awareness, a series of small moments that add up to an undeniable truth. Dutch is not the man Arthur thought he was, and maybe he never was. Maybe Arthur has been following a lie all along, and everything he's done, all the people he's killed, all the suffering he's caused, has been in service of one man's ego and delusions. This realization forces Arthur to confront his own complicity. He can't just blame Dutch for everything. He made his own choices, pulled his own triggers, hurt his own victims. Dutch may have led him down this path, but Arthur walked it willingly. The question becomes whether it's possible to find redemption after a lifetime of violence, whether good deeds at the end can balance out the harm done along the way. The game doesn't offer easy answers, but it suggests that trying to do better, even when it's too late to undo the past, has value in itself. The game's treatment of death is unflinching and often brutal. Characters you've spent hours with can die suddenly, without warning or ceremony. Hosea Matthews, the gang's wise elder and Arthur's father figure, is shot in the head during a robbery gone wrong. Sean Maguire, the young Irish hothead, is shot in the head during an ambush, dying instantly without even a chance to fight back. Lenny Summers, one of the youngest and most idealistic members of the gang, is killed during a rooftop chase, his body falling into the street below. These deaths are shocking not because they're graphic, but because they're sudden and final. There's no dramatic death scene, no last words, no chance for closure. They're just gone, and the world moves on. These sudden deaths reflect the reality of violence. People don't always get to make peace with their mortality, or say goodbye to their loved ones. Sometimes death comes quickly and without meaning, and all you can do is deal with the aftermath. The game is refusing to romanticize death, refusing to give every character a meaningful end. Some people just die, and that's all there is to it. The game also explores the concept of legacy and what we leave behind. Arthur becomes increasingly concerned with this as he faces his own mortality. He wants his life to have meant something, wants to believe that he made a positive difference despite all the harm he caused. He tries to help people, to make amends, to ensure that the people he cares about survive and have a chance at better lives. But he also knows that his legacy is complicated, that he'll be remembered as an outlaw and a killer, that the good he does at the end can't erase the harm he did throughout his life. This concern with legacy extends to the gang as a whole. Dutch talks constantly about leaving a mark, about being remembered, about their actions having meaning beyond mere survival. But what will their legacy actually be? A string of robberies and murders, a trail of victims and broken communities, a cautionary tale about the dangers of the outlaw life. They won't be remembered as heroes or freedom fighters. They'll be remembered as criminals if they're remembered at all. And that gap between how they see themselves and how the world sees them is a source of constant tension and eventual tragedy. The game's epilogue reinforces this theme. Years after Arthur's death, most people have forgotten about the Van der Linde gang. They're a footnote in history, a minor criminal enterprise that was eventually crushed by the forces of law and order. The world moved on without them, and their grand dreams of freedom and meaning came to nothing. Only the survivors remember, and they carry the weight of that memory alone. The game also explores themes of change and obsolescence. The world is changing rapidly in 1899, and the outlaws are being left behind. Technology is advancing, with trains and telegraphs, and eventually automobiles making the world smaller and more connected. Law enforcement is becoming more organised and effective, with agencies like the Pinkertons coordinating across state lines. The frontier is closing, with wild spaces being settled and civilised. The age of the outlaw is ending, and people like Dutch and Arthur are relics of a dying era. This obsolescence is both literal and metaphorical. The gang's skills and knowledge are becoming less valuable as the world changes. The ability to rob a stagecoach or rustle cattle means less when banks are using modern security and ranches are being consolidated into corporate operations. The freedom of the frontier means less when there's no frontier left, when every piece of land is owned and controlled and monitored. The gang is fighting to preserve a way of life that's already dead, and their refusal to adapt is what ultimately destroys them. Dutch represents this refusal to adapt most clearly. He keeps insisting that they just need one more score, that they can still escape to some mythical paradise where they'll be free from civilization's constraints. But that paradise doesn't exist anymore, if it ever did. The world has changed, and Dutch hasn't changed with it. He's still fighting battles that were lost years ago, still pursuing dreams that are no longer possible, and he's dragging his followers down with him. Arthur's arc involves coming to terms with this obsolescence. He realizes that the world he knew is dying, that there's no place for people like him anymore, that the future belongs to people like John Marston who can adapt and build new lives. His final acts are about ensuring that transition, about helping the next generation survive even though he knows he won't be part of their future. It's a bittersweet acceptance of his own irrelevance, a recognition that sometimes the best thing you can do is step aside and let others move forward. The game's world is filled with other examples of obsolescence and change. You encounter people whose livelihoods are being destroyed by progress, trappers whose hunting grounds are being settled, Native Americans whose land is being stolen, small farmers being pushed out by corporate agriculture. The game is showing you the human cost of progress, the people who are left behind or actively harmed by the march of civilization. It's not making a simple argument against progress, but it's asking you to consider what's lost and who pays the price. The environmental destruction is particularly striking. You see forests being clear-cut for lumber, mountains being scarred by mining, rivers being polluted by industry. The natural beauty that makes the game's world so stunning is being systematically destroyed in the name of profit and progress. The game is showing you the birth of industrial capitalism and its environmental consequences, and it's not a pretty picture. The world is being transformed from a wilderness into a resource to be exploited, and that transformation is irreversible. This environmental theme connects to the game's broader meditation on loss and impermanence. Everything in this world is temporary, everything is changing, and nothing can be preserved forever. The wilderness is being destroyed, the outlaws are being hunted to extinction, the old ways are dying, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. The game is asking you to sit with that loss, to feel the sadness of watching something beautiful disappear, to understand that change always comes with a cost. But the game also suggests that change isn't entirely negative, that the old ways weren't perfect, that progress brings benefits as well as costs. The outlaw life that Dutch romanticizes was brutal and violent, built on theft and murder, unsustainable in the long term. The frontier freedom he celebrates came at the cost of Native American genocide and environmental destruction. The game is presenting a nuanced view where the past wasn't as good as nostalgia suggests, but the future isn't as bright as progress promises. The game's length allows it to explore these themes in depth, to show the complexity and contradictions rather than reducing everything to simple messages. It takes time to develop these ideas, to show them from multiple perspectives, to let the player experience them rather than just being told about them. This is storytelling that respects its audience's intelligence and patience, that trusts that players will engage with difficult themes and ambiguous questions. As we near the end of our journey through the darkness, it's worth reflecting on why these disturbing elements are so effective, why they stay with us long after we've finished playing. Part of it is the craftsmanship, the attention to detail, the quality of the writing and performances, the technical excellence of the presentation. But it's more than that. The game is tapping into fundamental human fears and concerns, exploring themes that resonate on a deep level. The fear of death and mortality is central to the game's emotional impact. Arthur's tuberculosis diagnosis forces both him and the player to confront the reality of death, to think about what it means to die, to consider what legacy we leave behind. This is not an abstract or distant concern, it's immediate and personal, and the game makes you feel it in ways that few other games attempt. You watch Arthur decline, see him grow weaker, hear him struggle to breathe, and you know that there's nothing you can do to save him. It's a powerful reminder of our own mortality, of the fact that we're all dying, just at different speeds. The fear of meaninglessness is also central. Arthur spends his life following Dutch, believing in his vision, trusting that their actions have purpose and meaning. When that belief is shattered, when he realizes that Dutch is just a man with delusions, and that their crimes have caused more harm than good, he's left with the terrifying question of whether his life has meant anything at all. This existential crisis is something many people face, the fear that our lives are meaningless, that our actions don't matter, that we'll be forgotten, and that nothing we do will have lasting significance. The game suggests that meaning is something we create rather than something we discover. Arthur finds meaning in his final acts of kindness and sacrifice, in helping others even though it doesn't benefit him, in trying to do right even though it can't undo his past wrongs. The meaning isn't inherent in the universe, it's something Arthur chooses to create through his actions. This is a more hopeful message than it might initially seem, suggesting that we have agency in determining what our lives mean, that we're not just passive victims of fate or circumstance. The fear of betrayal and the loss of trust is another powerful theme. The gang is a family, and watching that family tear itself apart is painful, because it reflects our own fears about the relationships we depend on. What if the people we trust betray us? What if the institutions we believe in are corrupt? What if the leaders we follow are leading us astray? These are real fears that the game explores through the gang's dissolution, and they resonate because they're fears we all share to some degree. The game also explores the fear of losing control, of being swept along by forces beyond our ability to influence. Arthur tries to steer Dutch toward better decisions, tries to protect the gang from the consequences of Dutch's increasingly erratic behaviour, but he fails. He's powerless to stop the gang's destruction, powerless to save the people he cares about, powerless even to save himself from the disease that's killing him. This loss of agency is terrifying because it reflects our own experiences of being unable to control our circumstances, of watching bad things happen and being unable to prevent them. But the game also shows moments of agency and choice, moments where characters make decisions that matter and shape outcomes. Arthur chooses to help John escape, chooses to seek redemption, chooses how he'll spend his final days. These choices don't change the ultimate outcome. Arthur still dies, the gang still falls apart, but they matter because they define who Arthur is and what his life means. The game is suggesting that even when we can't control outcomes, we can control our responses, and that those responses define us. The disturbing elements of Red Dead Redemption 2 work because they're integrated into a larger whole, because they serve the themes and story rather than existing just for shock value. The serial killer isn't just a creepy side quest, he's a representation of the darkness that exists in human nature, the capacity for evil that civilization tries to suppress but never fully eliminates. The Night Folk aren't just scary enemies, they're a reminder that there are things in the world we don't understand, forces that operate by rules we can't comprehend. The Murfree brood aren't just cannibals, they're a warning about what happens when people reject all social bonds and moral codes. These elements combine to create a world that feels dangerous and unpredictable, where horror can strike at any moment, where safety is an illusion, and death is always close. But the game balances this darkness with moments of beauty and humanity, with relationships that matter, and acts of kindness that shine brighter because of the surrounding darkness. The contrast makes both elements more effective. The darkness is darker because we've seen the light, and the light is more precious because we know how rare it is. The game's ending, with Arthur's death and the gang's dissolution, is tragic but not nihilistic. There's sadness in the loss, grief for what might have been, But there's also a sense that Arthur found something meaningful in his final days, that his sacrifices mattered even if they didn't save everyone. The epilogue shows that some people survived, that John got his chance at a better life, that Arthur's death wasn't entirely in vain. It's a bittersweet ending that acknowledges the tragedy while also finding some small measure of hope. This balance between darkness and light, between tragedy and hope, is what makes Red Dead Redemption 2 so powerful and so memorable. It doesn't flinch from showing the worst of humanity, but it also celebrates the best. It shows you horror and beauty, cruelty and kindness, despair and hope, all woven together into a complex tapestry that feels true to the messiness of real life. It's a game that treats its audience as adults capable of handling difficult material and complex emotions, and that respect is part of what makes it so effective. As you drift into sleep, let these stories fade into the background of your consciousness. The darkness we've explored tonight is powerful, but it's also contained within the boundaries of fiction, a safe space to explore fears and questions without real danger. The serial killers and ghosts, the cannibals and cultists, the betrayals and tragedies, they're all part of a story, a carefully crafted narrative designed to evoke emotions and provoke thought. But the themes beneath those disturbing elements are real and worth contemplating. Questions about mortality and meaning, about loyalty and betrayal, about change and obsolescence, about the capacity for both good and evil that exists in all of us. These are questions that matter, that shape how we understand ourselves and our world. Red Dead Redemption 2 uses its disturbing lore to explore these questions in ways that are engaging and emotionally resonant, creating an experience that stays with you long after the credits roll. The game is a reminder that darkness exists, that terrible things happen, that life is often unfair and cruel. But it's also a reminder that we have choices in how we respond to that darkness, that we can find meaning even in difficult circumstances, that acts of kindness and sacrifice matter, even when they don't change the ultimate outcome. It's a complex, mature meditation on what it means to be human, wrapped in the trappings of a Western adventure game. The world of Red Dead Redemption 2 is also filled with smaller mysteries that never receive full explanations, leaving players to piece together what happened from environmental clues and scattered evidence. These unsolved mysteries are often more disturbing than the explained ones because they leave room for imagination, and what we imagine is often worse than what we're shown. There's a house in the bayou where you find a family that has been dead for some time, their bodies arranged around a dinner table as if they're still eating a meal. The food has long since rotted, and the bodies are in various stages of decomposition, but someone positioned them carefully, creating a grotesque tableau of domestic normalcy. Who did this? Why? Was it one of the family members who went mad? Was it an outsider who broke in and arranged the bodies for some twisted purpose? The game never tells you, and that ambiguity makes it more unsettling. There's a serial killer who targets prostitutes in St. Denis, leaving their bodies in specific locations around the city. Unlike Edmund Lowry Jr., this killer is never identified or caught. The bodies simply appear, each one mutilated in similar ways, each one left in a public place where it will be discovered quickly. The killer is making a statement, but what that statement is remains unclear. Are they punishing the women for their profession? Are they making some twisted artistic statement? Are they simply enjoying the act of killing and the fear it creates? The mystery remains unsolved, and the killer presumably continues their work even after Arthur's story ends. There's a cave system in the mountains where you find evidence of ritualistic activity, altars covered in blood, strange symbols carved into the walls, bones arranged in specific patterns. But there's no one there when you arrive, no explanation for what these rituals were meant to accomplish, or who was performing them. The cave feels wrong, feels like a place where terrible things happened, but the specifics remain hidden. This ambiguity allows your imagination to fill in the gaps, and what you imagine is probably more disturbing than any explanation the game could provide. The game also contains references to events that happened before the story begins, tragedies that shape the characters but never fully depicted. Arthur mentions a son who died, a woman he loved who left him, failures and losses that haunt him but are never fully explained. These references add depth to his character, suggesting a life full of pain and regret that extends beyond what we see in the game. They make Arthur feel like a real person with a complete history, rather than just a character who exists only within the game's time frame. Dutch mentions events from the gang's past, jobs that went wrong, members who died or left, conflicts with other gangs and with the law. These references create a sense of history, suggesting that the gang has been through many trials before the game begins, and that what we're seeing is just the final chapter of a much longer story. This history makes the gang's dissolution more tragic, because we understand that these relationships have been built over years or even decades, that the bonds being broken are deep and meaningful. The game's attention to detail extends to the way it depicts the aftermath of violence. Bodies don't just disappear, they remain where they fall, and if you return to a location days later, you might find the body still there, now decomposed and being picked apart by scavengers. This persistence creates a sense that your actions have lasting consequences, that the people you kill don't just vanish from existence, but leave behind physical evidence of their deaths. The scavenger behaviour is particularly well simulated. Vultures will circle above dead bodies, landing to feed when they feel safe. Coyotes and wolves will approach cautiously, watching for threats before beginning to feed. Even insects play their role, with flies buzzing around corpses and maggots appearing on bodies that have been dead for a while. The game is simulating the natural process of decomposition and the ecosystem's response to death, creating a level of realism that most games avoid. This attention to the aftermath of violence serves a thematic purpose. It's forcing you to confront the consequences of your actions, to see that the people you kill don't just disappear, but leave behind bodies that rot and decay. It's a reminder that death is not clean or abstract, that it's a physical process that's often ugly and disturbing. The game is refusing to let you distance yourself from the violence, refusing to sanitize it or make it comfortable. The game also depicts the psychological impact of violence on the characters. Arthur becomes more haunted as the game progresses, more troubled by the things he's done and seen. His journal entries reflect this growing unease, with sketches that become darker and more disturbing, with words that express doubt and regret. He's not a psychopath who kills without feeling. He's a man who has spent his life in violence and is finally starting to question whether it was worth it. Other characters show similar signs of psychological damage. Bill Williamson is angry and volatile, lashing out at perceived slights, unable to form healthy relationships. Javier Escuela is loyal to Dutch to a fault, unable to question authority, even when it's clearly leading him astray. Micah Bell is a sociopath who enjoys cruelty for its own sake, who manipulates and betrays without remorse. Each character's psychology is shaped by their experiences, and the game shows how violence and trauma warp people in different ways. The game's depiction of addiction is also unflinching. Several characters struggle with substance abuse, using alcohol or drugs to cope with the stress and trauma of their lives. The game shows how addiction progresses, how it starts as a coping mechanism and becomes a problem in itself, how it affects relationships and decision-making, how it can destroy people even when they're aware of what it's doing to them. This realistic portrayal of addiction adds another layer of tragedy to the gang's story, showing how people can be trapped by their own coping mechanisms. The economic desperation that drives much of the game's conflict is also depicted with brutal honesty. You see people who are one bad day away from starvation, who are willing to do terrible things because they have no other options, who are trapped in cycles of poverty that seem impossible to escape. The game is showing you a world where the social safety net doesn't exist, where there's no help for people who fall on hard times, where desperation drives people to crime and violence because there are no legitimate alternatives. This economic context makes the gang's criminal activities more understandable, if not more forgivable. They're not just robbing for fun or out of pure greed. They're trying to survive in a world that offers them few legitimate options. Dutch's philosophy about civilization being corrupt resonates because the game shows you a civilization that genuinely is corrupt, where the system is rigged to benefit the wealthy and punish the poor, where honest work often means exploitation and suffering. But the game also shows that crime isn't a solution to these problems. The gang's robberies create more victims, more suffering, more desperation. They're perpetuating the cycle of violence and poverty rather than breaking it, and ultimately their criminal lifestyle leads to their destruction, proving that you can't build a sustainable life on theft and murder. The game is presenting a complex picture where the system is unjust, but rebellion through violence only makes things worse. The disturbing lore of Red Dead Redemption 2 ultimately serves a greater purpose than simply shocking or unsettling the player. It creates a world that feels real in its complexity, where good and evil coexist, where beauty and horror are intertwined, where hope and despair exist side by side. This is a world that doesn't offer easy answers or comfortable resolutions, but it's a world that feels true to the human experience in all its messy, complicated reality. As you close your eyes and let sleep take you, remember that these stories, as dark as they are ultimately about the human capacity to endure, to find meaning in difficult circumstances, to seek redemption even when it seems impossible. Arthur Morgan's journey is tragic, but it's also inspiring in its way. He faces his mortality with courage, tries to do better even when it's too late to undo his past, and finds meaning in helping others even though it doesn't benefit him. The darkness we've explored tonight, the serial killers and ghosts, the cannibals and cultists, the betrayals and tragedies, all of it exists within the safe boundaries of fiction. These are stories crafted to evoke emotion and provoke thought, to explore the darker aspects of human nature in ways that are engaging and meaningful. They're disturbing, yes, but they're also compelling, drawing us in and making us think about questions that matter. Let the images fade now. Let the stories drift away like smoke on the wind. The frontier is quiet tonight, the stars bright overhead, the campfire burning low. Somewhere out there, Arthur Morgan rides through the wilderness, his horse's hooves crunching through snow, or splashing through streams. Somewhere, the gang gathers around the fire, telling stories and singing songs, enjoying a moment of peace before the storm comes. Somewhere the world continues its slow turn, indifferent to human drama, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Rest now, and let the darkness transform into dreams. The disturbing lore of Red Dead Redemption 2 has been told, the mysteries explored, the tragedies acknowledged. Tomorrow the sun will rise on the frontier, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the world will be beautiful again, ready for new stories, new adventures, new possibilities. But tonight, let sleep come gently, carrying you away from the darkness into peaceful rest. The American frontier awaits in your dreams, vast and wild and full of secrets. May your sleep be deep and your dreams be vivid, filled with wide open spaces and endless horizons. Good night, and may you wake refreshed, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow brings. The stories will be here when you return, waiting to be explored again, but for now, rest. Just rest.